In a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there lived a girl named Emily Carter. She wasn't extraordinary in the way people often imagine heroes or celebrities to be. She didn't have superhuman strength, dazzling talent, or an adventurous streak that made her stand out. Instead, Emily was known for her simplicity. Her warm smile could light up even the gloomiest of days, and her kindness touched everyone she met. Neighbors would often say how lucky her parents were to have such a sweet daughter, while teachers praised her diligence and thoughtfulness in class. Emily lived with her mother, father, and younger brother Liam in a cozy house at the edge of town. The Carters were a close-knit family who enjoyed spending weekends together playing board games, baking cookies, or taking long walks through the nearby woods. To many, they seemed like the perfect picture of happiness. But beneath this surface of contentment lay subtle cracks only visible to those paying close attention. Over time, Emily had become quieter, withdrawing into herself more than usual. At first, her parents chalked it up to typical teenage moodiness. After all, she was 16, a tricky age where hormones and emotions ran high. Yet something about her behavior felt different. One of the most noticeable changes was how much time Emily began spending alone in her room. What once used to be a bright, cheerful space filled with posters of her favorite bands and shelves lined with books now looked dimmer, almost secretive. Her desk was cluttered not with schoolwork but with sheets of paper covered in strange symbols and sketches that resembled ancient runes. No one knew what these markings meant, not even her best friend Sarah, who had been inseparable from Emily since childhood. When asked about them, Emily would brush it off with a vague answer like, "It's just something I'm working on," or, "You wouldn't understand." Her fascination with these mysterious drawings grew stronger over time. It started subtly, a doodle here, a quick sketch there. But soon entire notebooks were filled with intricate designs and patterns. These weren't random scribbles. They appeared deliberate, as though each line carried meaning. Sometimes, late at night, her family heard faint whispers coming from her room, though when questioned, Emily insisted she hadn't been talking to anyone. Her brother Liam once peeked inside and saw her staring intently at a piece of paper, her lips moving silently as if reciting words under her breath. Startled by his presence, she snapped the notebook shut and glared at him until he left. Despite her growing secrecy, Emily still tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. She attended school, hung out with Sarah occasionally, and helped her mom bake cookies every Sunday morning. But those around her couldn't ignore the shift in her personality. Gone was the bubbly, carefree girl who laughed easily and shared everything with her friends. In her place stood someone guarded, distant, and preoccupied. Even Sarah noticed the change. Their conversations, which used to flow effortlessly, now felt strained. Emily no longer confided in her the way she used to. When Sarah pressed her for details about what was bothering her, Emily simply shrugged and said, "I'm fine, really." The turning point came one crisp autumn evening. Emily had stayed late at school to finish a project and decided to walk home instead of waiting for her dad to pick her up. The route she took passed through the edge of the forest, a shortcut she'd used countless times before without incident. That night, however, she never made it back. Hours passed, and when dinner grew cold and Emily still hadn't returned, her family began to worry. They called her phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic set in as they alerted neighbors and organized search parties to comb the area. Days turned into weeks, and hope dwindled with each passing moment. Flyers with Emily's smiling face plastered every lamppost and store window in town. Volunteers scoured the woods, shouting her name into the eerie silence. Still, there was no sign of her. Then, just when despair threatened to consume everyone, a local hunter stumbled upon something chilling deep within the forest, a body lying motionless among the fallen leaves. Authorities rushed to the scene, bracing themselves for the worst. When they uncovered the face of the lifeless figure, their expressions shifted from sorrow to shock. What they found defied explanation. Though the body was unmistakably Emily's, her face bore little resemblance to the girl everyone remembered. Her features, once soft and welcoming, now appeared contorted in a mask of pure terror. Her eyes were wide open, frozen in a look of unrelenting fear while her mouth was twisted into what seemed like a silent scream. Stranger still were the faint markings etched onto her skin, symbols eerily similar to the ones she had been drawing in her notebook. Medical examiners were baffled. There were no signs of physical trauma, poisoning, or illness that could explain her death. It was as if something invisible yet profoundly malevolent had claimed her life. News of Emily's discovery spread like wildfire through the town, leaving its residents shaken. Whispers of curses and supernatural forces swirled in hushed tones. Some believed she had fallen victim to a dark ritual gone wrong, while others speculated that she had encountered something otherworldly in the forest. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: Emily's death was anything but ordinary. And as the investigation dragged on without answers, the questions surrounding her final days and the secrets she kept only deepened. When authorities arrived at the scene where Emily's body was discovered, they were unprepared for what awaited them. The forest, usually alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and chirping birds, felt eerily silent that day. As officers carefully approached the lifeless figure lying amidst the fallen leaves, their initial shock quickly turned into confusion, and then dread. The body was unmistakably Emily Carter's, but her face had undergone a transformation so unsettling that it left even seasoned investigators struggling to process what they were seeing. Emily's once familiar features were now distorted beyond recognition. Her warm, kind eyes that used to sparkle with laughter and curiosity, were wide open, frozen in an expression of sheer terror. It was as though she had witnessed something unimaginably horrifying in her final moments, something so overwhelming that it had imprinted itself permanently on her face. Her lips were parted slightly, curled into what appeared to be a silent scream, as if she had been trying to cry out but no sound escaped. The peacefulness people associated with death was entirely absent. Instead, her expression radiated anguish and despair. But it wasn't just the look of fear that unnerved those who saw her. Upon closer inspection, faint markings began to emerge on her skin, symbols etched delicately across her forehead, cheeks, and neck. These weren't random scratches or injuries sustained during her time in the woods. They were deliberate designs, intricate and precise, resembling the cryptic patterns Emily had been obsessively sketching in her notebooks. Some of the symbols looked like ancient runes, while others seemed more abstract, twisting and curling in ways that defied logic. The marks glowed faintly under the dim light filtering through the trees, adding to the surreal and otherworldly atmosphere surrounding her body. Medical examiners rushed to the site, hoping to determine the cause of death. They conducted thorough tests, searching for signs of poisoning, trauma, or illness. But every test came back inconclusive. There were no wounds, no broken bones, no traces of toxins in her system. Her heart showed no signs of failure, and there was nothing physically wrong with her organs. From a medical standpoint, Emily should have been alive. Yet here she lay, her life inexplicably extinguished, her face forever locked in a state of terror. It was as if some unseen force had drained the life from her, leaving behind only this haunting visage. As word of Emily's discovery spread through the town, panic rippled through its residents. Flyers bearing her smiling face still hung on lampposts and store windows, a stark contrast to the image of her now sealed fate. People gathered in small groups, whispering theories about what could have happened. Some believed she had stumbled upon a dangerous animal in the forest, though no claw marks or bite wounds supported this idea. Others speculated that she might have fallen victim to foul play, yet there was no evidence of violence or struggle. A few dared to suggest darker possibilities, that Emily's death was linked to supernatural forces, curses, or entities beyond human comprehension. The strange symbols on her skin became a focal point of these discussions. Many recalled how Emily had spent hours alone in her room, drawing similar patterns in her notebook. At first, her family and friends had dismissed it as harmless doodling or a phase typical of teenagers exploring their creativity. Now, however, those same drawings took on a sinister significance. What did the symbols mean? Where had Emily learned about them? And why were they appearing on her skin after her death? The questions swirled endlessly, fueling both fear and fascination. Local newspapers picked up the story, running headlines that captured the eerie nature of Emily's demise. Teen found dead with mysterious markings. The girl whose face changed after death. And was it a curse? Journalists interviewed neighbors, classmates, and teachers, piecing together fragments of Emily's life in hopes of uncovering clues. One classmate mentioned how Emily had become increasingly withdrawn in recent months, rarely participating in group activities or sharing personal details. Another recounted overhearing her talking to herself late one night, her voice low and urgent as if engaged in a heated argument with someone invisible. Her parents, overwhelmed by grief and confusion, struggled to make sense of what had happened. They sifted through Emily's belongings, searching for anything that might shed light on her obsession with the symbols. In her room, they found stacks of notebooks filled with page after page of intricate designs, along with scraps of paper containing half-formed phrases written in shaky handwriting. Some pages contained references to rituals, spirits, and wishes, though the context remained unclear. Her father, a practical man who prided himself on rational thinking, tried to convince himself that his daughter had simply gotten caught up in fantasy stories or online role-playing games. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister was at play. Meanwhile, strange occurrences began to plague the town. Neighbors reported hearing faint whispers echoing through empty streets at night, though no source could be identified. Pets grew restless, barking uncontrollably or hiding under furniture without explanation. Objects moved seemingly on their own, a vase tipping over when no one was near, doors creaking open despite being securely closed. Even photographs taken around the time of Emily's death revealed anomalies. Shadowy figures lurking in the background, blurred shapes hovering over shoulders, and faces that didn't belong to anyone present. For Sarah, Emily's best friend, the events unfolding around her felt deeply personal. She had known Emily longer than anyone else, sharing secrets, dreams, and countless memories. Now, staring at the photo of her friend's altered face plastered across news articles, Sarah couldn't help but feel responsible. Why hadn't she noticed the warning signs sooner? Why hadn't she pushed harder to understand what was troubling Emily? Guilt gnawed at her relentlessly, driving her to seek answers where others feared to tread. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah decided to revisit Emily's room, hoping to find something overlooked by investigators. She rummaged through drawers, flipped through old journals, and examined every corner of the space. Among the clutter, she stumbled upon a crumpled receipt tucked inside a forgotten shoebox. It was dated several months earlier and listed the purchase of a single item. Ancient Grimoire, $45. Beneath the description was the name of a shop located on the outskirts of town, an antique store rumored to sell items of dubious origin. Sarah's heart raced as she realized this might be the key to understanding what had happened to Emily. If the grimoire mentioned in the receipt contained information about the symbols or rituals, it could explain not only Emily's transformation, but also the strange phenomena plaguing the town. Armed with this newfound clue, Sarah resolved to track down the shop and its owner, hoping to piece together the puzzle before it was too late. Little did she know, her journey would lead her down a path fraught with danger, mystery, and revelations that would challenge everything she thought she knew about her friend and herself. Sarah's mind raced as she clutched the crumpled receipt in her hand. The words Ancient Grimoire felt heavy, almost ominous, as if they carried a weight far beyond their simple meaning. She couldn't shake the feeling that this book, whatever it was, had played a role in Emily's death and the strange events that followed. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah decided to visit the antique shop listed on the receipt. It wasn't just curiosity driving her. It was guilt, fear, and an unshakable sense of responsibility for her best friend. The shop was located on the outskirts of town, tucked away behind overgrown bushes and a crooked wooden sign that read, "Mystic Curiosities." From the outside, it looked like something out of an old horror movie. A dilapidated building with peeling paint, foggy windows, and a faint smell of dampness in the air. Sarah hesitated before stepping inside, her heart pounding in her chest. Pushing open the creaky door, She was greeted by the sound of bells jingling softly overhead and the musty scent of aged wood and dust. The interior was dimly lit, filled with shelves crammed with odd trinkets. Tarnished mirrors, cracked ceramics, jars containing unidentifiable objects floating in murky liquid, and stacks of yellowed books. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with thinning gray hair and sharp, piercing eyes that seemed to see right through her. His name tag read Mr. Hargrove, though his presence felt more like that of a guardian, or perhaps a gatekeeper, than a mere shopkeeper. He looked up from polishing a small brass figurine and raised an eyebrow at Sarah. "Can I help you?" he asked in a gravelly voice, his tone neither friendly nor hostile but laced with caution. "I'm looking for something," Sarah began hesitantly, clutching the receipt tighter. "A book, an ancient grimoire. Someone bought it here a few months ago." Mr. Hargrove's expression darkened slightly, and he set the figurine down on the counter. "The grimoire," he repeated slowly, as if weighing each syllable. "That's not an item one forgets easily. May I ask why you're asking about it?" Sarah swallowed hard, unsure how much to reveal. "It belonged to my friend, Emily Carter. She passed away recently, and I think this book might have something to do with what happened to her." At the mention of Emily's name, Mr. Hargrove's demeanor shifted. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze narrowing. "Emily came here," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then, after a pause, he added, "She was searching for answers." "What kind of answers?" Sarah pressed, leaning closer across the counter. Her voice trembled with urgency. "And what exactly is in that book?" Hargrove sighed deeply, running a wrinkled hand over his face. For a moment, he seemed reluctant to speak, as if burdened by memories or secrets too heavy to share. Finally, he spoke. "The grimoire contains rituals, powerful ones. It speaks of summoning entities capable of granting wishes, but there's always a price. Always." "A price?" Sarah echoed, her stomach sinking. "What kind of price?" "That depends on the wish," Hargrove replied cryptically. "Some pay with their happiness, others with their sanity, or worse. The book doesn't discriminate. It gives power, yes, but it demands sacrifice in return." Sarah's mind flashed back to Emily's final days. The isolation, the strange symbols, the whispered conversations late at night. Had she wished for something? Was that why she had changed so drastically? And if so, what had she wished for? Before she could ask more questions, Hargrove continued. "Emily didn't strike me as someone reckless. She seemed desperate, though. When she left with the book, I warned her not to use it unless she fully understood the consequences. Clearly." His voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Do you still have the book or any copies of it?" "No," Hargrove said firmly. "Once sold, it cannot be returned. Besides, I wouldn't sell another even if I had it. That book has caused enough trouble already." Frustrated but undeterred, Sarah pushed further. "Is there anything else you can tell me? Anything that might help me figure out what happened to her?" Hargrove hesitated again, then reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn and cracked, with faded gold lettering that read "Warnings and Remedies." He slid it toward Sarah. "This won't give you all the answers, but it might guide you. Be careful, though. Whatever path you choose, tread lightly." Sarah took the journal, her fingers brushing against its rough surface. She thanked him and quickly left the shop, her mind racing with possibilities. As she walked home, she flipped through the pages, finding notes and sketches similar to those in Emily's notebooks. Some sections described protective charms, while others outlined steps to undo certain rituals. One passage caught her eye. "To banish an entity summoned by mistake, perform the ritual of severance under the light of the full moon, using items tied to the soul of the afflicted." Could this be the key to helping Emily? Could it explain the markings on her skin or the haunting presence lingering in the town? Sarah knew she needed more information, but she also realized she couldn't do this alone. She needed someone who understood folklore and the supernatural, someone smarter and braver than her. The next day, Sarah sought out Mark Thompson, a local historian known for his fascination with myths and legends. Mark was older than Sarah, around 25, with glasses perched on his nose and a perpetually curious expression. He spent most of his time buried in books at the town library, researching obscure topics no one else cared about. Though Sarah barely knew him, she figured he was her best bet. When she explained everything, the mysterious symbols, the grimoire, Emily's death, and the strange occurrences plaguing the town, Mark listened intently, his eyes widening with each revelation. By the time she finished, he was already nodding thoughtfully. "This sounds like a classic case of unintended invocation," he said, adjusting his glasses. "People often dabble in things they don't understand, thinking they'll gain control over them. But these forces are unpredictable. If Emily summoned something, it's likely still here, feeding off the energy of those connected to her." Sarah shivered at the thought. "So what do we do? How do we stop it?" Mark grabbed a stack of books from a nearby shelf and spread them across the table. "We need to recreate the ritual she performed, but backwards. A reversal. We'll need specific items tied to her life, like a lock of her hair, a personal belonging, and something pure, like salt water blessed under the moonlight, and we'll need to perform it exactly where she died." Though the plan sounded daunting and risky, Sarah agreed. Together, they began gathering the necessary materials. Mark researched the exact steps required for the ritual, cross-referencing texts and making detailed notes. Meanwhile, Sarah collected a strand of Emily's hair from her hairbrush, retrieved her favorite locket from her parents, and prepared the salt water during the next full moon. As the date of the ritual approached, however, strange things started happening more frequently. Shadows moved independently in Sarah's room. Whispers echoed in empty hallways, and cold spots appeared without explanation. Even Mark admitted he felt uneasy, as if whatever force they were dealing with knew they were planning something. Despite their growing fear, they pressed on, driven by a mix of determination and desperation. On the eve of the ritual, Sarah sat alone in her room, staring at the items they had gathered. Her mind kept returning to Emily, the laughter they once shared, the secrets they kept from each other, and the unanswered questions that now hung between them. She vowed silently to see this through, no matter the cost. Whatever had taken Emily, whatever ate she. The night of the ritual arrived, cloaked in an eerie stillness that seemed to stretch across the entire town. The air was unusually cold for the season, and a thick fog rolled in from the woods, blanketing everything in a ghostly haze. Sarah and Mark stood at the edge of the forest, their breath visible in the frosty air, clutching the items they had painstakingly gathered over the past few days. A lock of Emily's hair, her silver locket engraved with tiny stars, and a vial of salt water blessed under the light of the full moon rested securely in a small wooden box between them. They exchanged nervous glances, each silently wondering if they were truly ready for what lay ahead. Mark adjusted his backpack, which contained pages of notes detailing the steps of the ritual. He had spent hours poring over ancient texts, cross-referencing symbols and incantations to ensure they wouldn't make any mistakes. One wrong word, one misplaced item, could have catastrophic consequences, or so the books warned. "Are you sure about this?" he asked Sarah, his voice low but steady. "I don't have a choice," she replied firmly, though her hands trembled as she tightened her grip on the flashlight. "If we don't do this, whatever's out there will keep hurting people. I can't let that happen." With that, they ventured into the forest, guided only by the dim beam of their flashlights and the faint glow of the moon filtering through the dense canopy above. The path leading to the spot where Emily's body had been found felt longer than Sarah remembered, every step heavier than the last. Shadows danced unnaturally around them, twisting and shifting as if alive. The usual sounds of nocturnal creatures, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against their ears. When they finally reached the clearing, the atmosphere changed palpably. It was colder here, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made it hard to breathe. The ground was littered with dead leaves, and the trees surrounding the area seemed taller, darker and more menacing than before. At the center of the clearing stood a large, gnarled tree whose twisted branches reached skyward like skeletal fingers. This was where Emily had been found, her lifeless body lying beneath its shadow. "This is it?" Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. He opened his backpack and began laying out the materials while Sarah placed the wooden box carefully on the ground. Together, they arranged candles in a circle around the tree, lighting them one by one until the clearing was bathed in flickering, orange light. The flames cast strange shadows on the bark of the tree, making it appear almost alive, watching them with silent curiosity. Mark pulled out a sheet of paper and cleared his throat. "Okay, according to the texts, we need to recite the invocation first. Then we'll place the items inside the circle and finish with the reversal chant. Whatever happens, we stick to the script. Got it?" Sarah nodded, though her heart was racing. She knelt beside him, clutching the locket tightly in her hand. As Mark began reading the invocation, his voice grew stronger, echoing slightly in the stillness of the forest. The words were unfamiliar, melodic, yet haunting, spoken in a language neither of them fully understood. Each syllable seemed to resonate with the air itself, sending ripples through the candle flames and causing the temperature to drop even further. Suddenly the wind picked up, swirling violently around them despite the lack of open space for it to gather momentum. Leaves whipped through the air, stinging their skin, and the candles flickered dangerously close to going out. Sarah shielded her face with her arm, squinting against the chaos. "Keep going," she shouted over the howling wind. "Don't stop," Mark continued chanting, his voice unwavering despite the growing tension. When he reached the end of the invocation, he signaled for Sarah to place the items within the circle. With trembling hands, she opened the wooden box and laid out the lock of Emily's hair, the locket, and the vial of salt water. The moment the objects touched the ground, the earth beneath them shuddered violently as if something deep below was stirring awake. Then, without warning, the world around them froze. The wind died down instantly, leaving an unnatural calm in its wake. The candles burned brighter, their flames now a blinding white, illuminating the clearing with an otherworldly glow. And then slowly, a figure began to materialize in front of them. At first, it was just a faint outline, a shimmering distortion in the air. But as seconds passed, the form grew clearer. It was Emily, or at least what remained of her. Her translucent figure hovered inches above the ground, her features wavering between two extremes. The familiar face of the girl they once knew, and the twisted, terrified visage discovered after her death. Her eyes darted wildly, filled with both sorrow and anger, and her lips moved soundlessly, forming words no one could hear. "Emily," Sarah breathed, tears welling up in her eyes. She wanted to run to her friend, to embrace her and tell her everything would be okay. But she couldn't move. Something held her rooted to the spot, a mix of fear and awe that paralyzed her. Mark stepped forward cautiously, holding the sheet of paper tighter. "We're here to help you," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You're trapped, aren't you? We can free you, but you have to let us." For a long moment, Emily said nothing, her gaze shifting between Sarah and Mark. Then, in a voice that was both soft and piercing, she spoke. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her tone laced with regret. "I just wanted to be loved, to belong." Sarah's chest tightened. "What did you wish for, Emily? What did the book give you?" Emily hesitated, her form flickering like a faulty light bulb. "I wished to be accepted," she admitted, her voice trembling. "To have friends who truly cared, a family that understood me. But instead, it gave me him." "Him?" Mark repeated, frowning. "Who's him?" Before Emily could answer, the ground beneath them quaked again, this time more violently. The candles wobbled precariously, nearly tipping over, and the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. From the darkness beyond the circle came a low, guttural growl, followed by a pair of glowing red eyes that pierced through the fog. Whatever entity Emily had summoned was closing in, drawn by the ritual. "He's coming," Emily warned, her expression shifting back to terror. "You have to finish the reversal now. If he reaches you, none of us will survive." Panic surged through Sarah, but she forced herself to focus. Mark quickly began reciting the reversal chant, his voice rising above the growing cacophony of growls and whispers emanating from the shadows. Sarah joined in, repeating the phrases after him, their voices blending together in a desperate attempt to overpower the encroaching darkness. As they chanted, the figure of Emily grew brighter, her ethereal form pulsating with light. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she realized what was happening. The ritual was working. Emily was being freed from whatever hold the entity had on her. But the cost was clear. The creature wasn't letting go easily. The red eyes advanced, closer, accompanied by a deafening roar that shook the very foundations of the forest. Branches snapped overhead and the candles sputtered, threatening to extinguish. Just as the entity broke through the barrier of the circle, Mark shouted the final line of the chant. In an instant, the clearing erupted in a blinding flash of light, forcing Sarah and Mark to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the forest was silent once more. The candles had gone out, leaving only the pale glow of the moon to illuminate the clearing. Emily was gone, her figure dissolving into a cascade of golden sparks that drifted upward like fireflies before vanishing into the night sky. The oppressive weight in the air lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and peace that hadn't been felt in weeks. Exhausted but relieved, Sarah collapsed onto the damp earth, her body trembling with emotion. Mark sat beside her, equally drained but smiling faintly. "We did it," he murmured. "She's free." But as they packed up their belongings and prepared to leave the forest, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered, something unresolved. Deep down, she knew they had succeeded in releasing Emily's spirit, but the entity they had confronted was ancient, powerful, and far from defeated. For now, it had retreated, but she couldn't help wondering if it would return, and whether they'd be ready if it did. The forest, once suffocating with its oppressive energy, now felt eerily calm. The air was lighter, almost breathable again, as if a storm had passed and left the world cleansed in its wake. Sarah and Mark sat on the damp ground, their bodies weary but their hearts heavy with mixed emotions. They had done what they set out to do. They had freed Emily's spirit from whatever dark force had been holding her captive. Yet despite the sense of relief that washed over them, an unsettling feeling lingered in the back of their minds. Something about the way the entity had roared, the way its red eyes burned into theirs before vanishing. It felt too final to be gone forever. Mark broke the silence first, his voice low and cautious. "Do you think it's really over?" he asked, glancing around the clearing as though expecting the shadows to shift or the trees to whisper secrets. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She stared at the spot where Emily's figure had dissolved, into golden sparks, replaying the moment in her mind. Her friend's face, both familiar and terrifying, had softened just before disappearing, as if she were finally at peace. But the memory of those glowing red eyes haunted her. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "We stopped it this time, but I can't shake the feeling that we only slowed it down." Mark nodded grimly. He knew better than anyone how these things worked. Or at least, he thought he did. Ancient texts often spoke of entities like the one they had encountered. Beings older than time itself, bound by rules incomprehensible to humans. These creatures thrived on chaos, feeding off fear, despair, and unresolved desires. Once summoned, they rarely left willingly. Even when banished, they waited patiently in the shadows, biding their time until another opportunity arose. "We might not have seen the last of it," Mark said after a pause, his tone measured but tinged with unease. "But for now, Emily is safe. That's what matters." Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Yeah, I guess you're right." Still, she couldn't ignore the nagging doubt gnawing at her thoughts. What if freeing Emily hadn't been enough? What if the entity still had ties to the town, to the people who had known her? She glanced at the items scattered across the ground. The lock of Emily's hair, the locket, the vial of salt water. Each object carried a piece of her friend's essence, yet none could erase the marks the ritual had left behind. Not on the forest, not on the town, and certainly not on her own heart. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Sarah noticed something strange. The symbols etched onto the bark of the gnarled tree, the same ones that had appeared on Emily's skin, were fading. Where once they had glowed faintly, pulsing with an unnatural energy, they now seemed to dissolve into nothingness, absorbed by the wood as though they had never existed. It was as if the tree itself was reclaiming its innocence, erasing the stain of darkness that had tainted it. "Look," Sarah whispered, pointing at the tree. "They're gone." Mark followed her gaze, his brow furrowing. "That's unexpected," he murmured. "Maybe the reversal worked better than I thought." But Sarah wasn't convinced. Symbols like those didn't just disappear without consequence. They were remnants of power, fragments of something far greater than either of them understood. Their disappearance felt less like victory and more like a warning, a reminder that forces beyond their control were still at play. The walk back to town was quiet, each step heavier than the last. By the time they emerged from the forest, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. The sight should have been comforting, a symbol of new beginnings, but Sarah couldn't shake the chill that clung to her bones. As they parted ways near the edge of town, Mark promised to keep researching, to make sure they hadn't missed anything crucial. "If there's even a chance this thing could come back, we need to be ready," he said firmly. Sarah agreed, though, deep down, she doubted preparation would matter against something so ancient and powerful. Still, she appreciated his determination. For the first time since Emily's death, she didn't feel entirely alone in her struggle. When she returned home, exhaustion finally caught up with her. She collapsed onto her bed, fully clothed, and closed her eyes, hoping sleep would bring some semblance of peace. But instead of rest, her dreams were plagued by visions of the forest, the twisted tree, the glowing symbols, the red eyes watching her from the darkness. And then, suddenly, Emily appeared. In the dream, Emily looked different, not the terrified version they had seen during the ritual, nor the smiling girl from old photographs, but someone in between. Her features were serene, her expression calm, yet there was a sadness in her eyes that made Sarah's chest ache. "Thank you," Emily whispered, her voice soft but clear. "You saved me." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she reached out to her friend, desperate to hold her, to tell her how much she missed her. But before she could touch her, Emily stepped back, shaking her head gently. "It's not over," she warned, her tone urgent. "He'll try again. You have to—" "Protect them." "Protect who?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "What do you mean?" Emily didn't answer. Instead, she began to fade, her form dissolving into golden light, just as it had in the forest. Before she vanished completely, she mouthed 2 words. "Be careful." Sarah woke with a start, gasping for air, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. The room was silent except for the faint hum of her bedside clock ticking away the early morning hours. She sat up slowly, wiping the sweat from her forehead, and tried to steady her breathing. It had been a dream, just a dream, but it felt so real, so vivid. Emily's warning echoed in her mind, refusing to fade. Over the next few days, life in the town began to return to normal, or as normal as it could be after everything that had happened. The strange occurrences that had plagued residents since Emily's death gradually subsided. Pets stopped acting skittish, objects stopped moving on their own, and the whispers in empty rooms ceased altogether. People breathed easier, convinced that whatever curse or haunting had gripped the town had finally lifted. Yet Sarah remained vigilant. She kept a close eye on her surroundings, noticing subtle changes others seemed to overlook. Shadows lingered longer than they should in certain corners of the house. Cold spots appeared randomly, even on warm afternoons. And sometimes, late, at night, she swore she heard faint footsteps outside her window, as though someone or something was pacing back and forth. One evening, while helping her mother bake cookies in the kitchen. Sarah found herself staring absently at the calendar. Hanging on the wall, tomorrow marked exactly 1 month since Emily's body had been discovered. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. Was it coincidence or was there significance to the timing? She remembered Mark mentioning that rituals often aligned with lunar cycles or specific dates. Could the entity be tied to such patterns? Driven by unease, Sarah decided to pay him a visit later that night. She needed answers and reassurance that the danger truly was behind them. When she arrived at his apartment, he greeted her with a knowing look as if he'd been expecting her. "I've been thinking about what you said," he admitted, gesturing for her to sit down, "about the possibility of it coming back. I've been digging deeper into the texts, trying to find anything that might help us prepare." "And?" Sarah prompted, leaning forward anxiously. Mark hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "There are legends of entities like this. One story mentions a shadow tether. If the entity formed a bond with someone here, it might use that connection to return, but..." He paused, looking uneasy. "Breaking the tether requires destroying the source of its power. What does that mean?" Sarah asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "It means finding the book," Mark replied gravely. "The grimoire Emily used. As long as it exists, the entity has a foothold in our world." Sarah's blood ran cold. Destroying the book had seemed impossible before. Now it felt downright hopeless. Who knew where it was or who had it? Had Emily taken it with her to the forest, or had it been left behind somewhere? Either way, tracking it down would be dangerous, if not impossible. Despite the daunting task ahead, Sarah resolved not to give up. She owed it to Emily, to everyone, to ensure the entity stayed banished. With Mark's help, she vowed to uncover the truth no matter how dark or terrifying it might be. Because deep down, she knew one thing for certain. The nightmare wasn't over. It was merely waiting. The days that followed were a blur of research, restless nights, and mounting tension. Sarah and Mark pored over every scrap of information they could find about the grimoire, the ancient book that had started it all. They scoured old libraries, online forums dedicated to folklore, and even reached out to obscure collectors who specialized in rare artifacts. Each lead brought them closer to understanding the true nature of the entity they had faced, but none provided concrete answers about the book's whereabouts. The grimoire seemed to have vanished without a trace, as if it didn't want to be found. Despite their efforts, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The dreams continued, vivid, haunting visions of Emily warning her to stay vigilant. In one particularly unsettling dream, Emily appeared in the forest again, standing beneath the gnarled tree. This time, however, the tree was alive with glowing symbols pulsing like a heartbeat. "It's still here," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "You need to end it before it finds another host." "What do you mean, another host?" Sarah asked desperately, reaching out to her friend. But once again, Emily faded into golden light, leaving Sarah alone in the darkness. When she woke, Sarah felt more determined than ever. She shared the dream with Mark, who listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. "If the entity needs a host to manifest fully," he said slowly, "then we're dealing with something far more dangerous than I realized. It won't stop until it has someone else to latch onto." Sarah's stomach churned at the idea. The thought of someone else suffering because of this thing, the same way Emily had, was unbearable. "We can't let that happen," she said, firmly. "We'll destroy the book no matter what it takes." Their breakthrough came unexpectedly. While sorting through Emily's belongings for the 100th time, Sarah stumbled upon something she hadn't noticed before. A small, folded piece of paper tucked inside the pages of Emily's favorite novel. On it was written an address, a location on the outskirts of town, and a single sentence scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Where it began." Mark's eyes widened when she showed him the note. "This could be it," he said, his voice tinged with both excitement and apprehension. "If the book is tied to where Emily first encountered it, this might lead us straight to it." They decided to investigate immediately. The address turned out to be an abandoned cabin nestled deep within the woods, miles away from any signs of civilization. As they approached, the air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around them, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. The cabin itself was decrepit, its wooden walls warped and splintered, its windows boarded up. Yet, despite its dilapidated state, there was an undeniable aura of malevolence surrounding it, a sense that something dark lingered within. Steeling themselves, Sarah and Mark stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit by shafts of sunlight filtering through cracks in the boards, revealing a space cluttered with cobwebs, broken furniture, and piles of dust-covered junk. At the center of the room stood a rickety table, atop which lay the grimoire. The book was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Its cover was made of cracked leather embossed with intricate patterns that matched the symbols they had encountered so many times before. The pages glowed faintly, as though imbued with some unnatural energy. Even from across the room, Sarah could feel its pull, a strange, almost magnetic force urging her closer. "This is it," Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. He hesitated, then added, "But destroying it won't be easy. Something this powerful. It won't go quietly." Sarah nodded, her resolve unwavering. "Then we do whatever it takes." Following instructions from the texts Mark had studied, they prepared a makeshift ritual designed to neutralize the book's power. They placed it in the center of a circle drawn with salt, surrounded by candles blessed under moonlight. As Mark recited the incantation, Sarah held her breath, watching closely for any sign of resistance. At first, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, the book began to tremble violently, its pages flipping wildly as if caught in an invisible wind. A low growl emanated from within it, growing louder and angrier with each passing second. Shadows swirled around the room, coalescing into the shape of red eyes, eyes that burned with fury and malice. "You think you can destroy me?" A voice snarled, echoing off the walls. It wasn't human. It was guttural, distorted, and filled with hatred. "I am eternal. I cannot be erased." Sarah's heart raced, but she refused to back down. "You've already lost," she shouted, her voice steady despite her fear. "Emily is free, and we won't let you hurt anyone else." With those words, Mark completed the chant. The candles flared brightly, their flames turning white-hot as a surge of energy coursed through the room. The book let out an ear-splitting scream, its cover cracking open as black smoke poured from its pages. For a moment, the entire cabin shook, threatening to collapse, but then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos subsided. When the smoke cleared, the book was gone. All that remained was a pile of ash in the center of the circle. Sarah and Mark exchanged a glance, relief washing over them. It was finally over. In the weeks that followed, life in the town returned to normal, or as close to normal as possible. The strange occurrences ceased entirely, and people began to heal from the trauma of recent events. Sarah visited Emily's grave often, leaving flowers and talking to her as if she were still there. Though she missed her friend deeply, she took comfort in knowing Emily was finally at peace. One evening, while tidying up Emily's old room, Sarah discovered one last item hidden beneath a loose floorboard, a journal entry dated just days before Emily's disappearance. In it, Emily wrote about her fears, her loneliness, and her hope that someday she'd find acceptance. At the bottom of the page, a final message read, "Be careful what you wish for." Sarah smiled sadly, closing the notebook. She had learned the hard way how true those words were. But she also knew that Emily's story wasn't just a cautionary tale. It was a reminder of the importance of love, friendship, and staying true to oneself. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Sarah vowed never to forget the lessons she had learned. And as she walked away from the room, shutting off the light, she couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of closure. The nightmare was over, but its impact would stay with her forever. A scar, yes, but also a symbol of strength.